Cool.
Great. All right. Ready for some Kicks Over Coffee?
I am. I'm ready for some Kicks Over Coffee as well. And we had 25 people on the channel that we couldn't start, and now we have 8. So we're gonna give people a few moments to sign on, and as they migrate their way over to this channel.
Thanks to everybody that's joined us on a Friday afternoon for our Kicks Over Coffee live stream to talk about the latest when it comes to the tariff threat on China and the Trump tariffs. Got a lot happening on that, and so we want to cover that today. So appreciate everybody that has joined us live for this great series that we're doing. You can check out our YouTube channel to see all the videos that we have on Kicks Over Coffee.
Yeah,
a lot of great discussion, and so hopefully we'll have some good discussion today. And just a minute or so as we let the people that were on the other feed join this one. So I think we've got other people that are trying to get on now, and we want to give them a second to do that.
Yeah, we're going to be pushing it out to LinkedIn and elsewhere. So we can get started in just a minute. It's a nice gloomy Friday afternoon here in DC.
But it feels good. It's been hot. It's been really, really hot this week, and so
it's been hot.
It is gloomy, but the weather is actually nice and cool right now.
I think it was 98 yesterday.
It was pushing up to 100.
Yeah, I went for a run. And I thought I was going to die. I mean, I literally thought I could not cool off.
Today is the day to go for a run.
Today is the day to go for a run, but instead I have to hang out live on YouTube and talk about tariffs.
Yeah,
exactly. So we'll give it another minute or two because we are running behind and we are cognizant of your time. But there's a lot going on. There's been a lot of developments, and that's why I had to go get my second coffee of the day, because this is Kicks Over Coffee. I did do a Kicks Over Coffee once where I did not have coffee, and it didn't feel right.
All right. Well, I don't have coffee today, so
maybe
it doesn't feel right. This is actually tea. It's such a gloomy day.
You're fired.
Get some tea. All right.
All right, so for this version of Kicks Over Coffee, Thomas, we are going to talk about all the latest developments as it relates to the footwear industry and the Trump tariffs. And what we encourage you to do is to utilize the chat box to post your questions to us, and we'll be happy to answer them as we go along. But we wanted to kind of open this up to the broader industry. We actually do have we have member calls, FDRA member calls, usually about this time every Friday. We've taken a break this week just to catch our breath. And we usually have about 100 people on those calls, and we're kind of walking through what's, the latest lay of the land as it relates to tariffs and trade and Trump, all the 3 T's. And so we wanted to do something a little different this time around. And knowing that when we decided to do this, there weren't that many developments, and there still aren't a whole lot of developments. But there are all these kind of little signs that are out there that we're starting to read into the tea leaves as to what the administration is thinking and what the Chinese government is thinking as it relates to a potential deal. And that's kind of how the environment we're in. Yeah. We are like, no matter if the spokesperson at MOFCOM in Beijing has a smile on his face while he's going to get a coffee, the stock market goes up. We're that kind of in tune with the signals and signs as to how we think something might be moving in the positive or the negative. And right. I think it's all kind of driving us a little bit crazy.
And it goes up and down. It changes weekly, hourly, tweet by tweet. And so we try to keep you updated as soon as something big happens. And as Matt said, we do these calls every week, 1 o'clock on Friday. And it's something where we've been maxed out on the calls almost every week, where you have such a large number of people joining. This is just a different format than we normally do. But there have been some interesting developments this week. I think the first one to think about is probably the peace offerings. We've gotten we have both sides have given some peace offerings, which people have read differently.
Right.
I think initially what the Chinese have made an offer to buy more U.S. agricultural products. The president announced this week that he was going to delay the list 1, 2, and 3 tariffs by 2 weeks,
right,
to October 15th. Those were going to go into effect. They're at 25% now. All those were going to shoot up to 30% on October 1st. He delayed them 2 weeks. as a show,
which is billions of dollars, right?
Right.
That would have been billions of dollars of increases.
So I think one way of looking at that is, if you're in sourcing or you're dealing with supply chains, you're like, all right, I've got 2 weeks to comply with us. 2 more weeks, is it that big of a difference? There's a lot of cynicism, especially in DC, when there's any type of when it comes to trade policy right now and what's going on. And so there's cynicism with this move. Is that what you have, Matt? I mean, do you see the same kind of negative outlook in that, hey, we just have 2 more weeks left?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've seen a number of people comment just to us and maybe off the record in a sense, like 2 weeks is nothing. He thinks that's some kind of benefit to us. And my view is it's always been that delay has nothing to do with the supply chain. The supply chain disruptions are already in place, and the president wasn't thinking of supply chain disruptions or, hey, if I give them till October 15th, that'll give people time to adjust. It was all about the timing of the next round of talks, right? So they had announced that they are going to meet the first week of October. And then you had this awkward timing where the deadline for the bump up from 25 to 30% on lists 1, 2, and 3 was going to take place right before the talks resumed. So, I think because the Chinese did not retaliate on list 4A going to effect September 1st, and the president decided to delay the bump up, which was, I think, the Chinese were seeking. Obviously, the president decided to delay the bump up of lists 1, 2, and 3 from 25 to 30% to October 15th. That had nothing to do with the supply chain and American companies. Had way more to do with 2 things. One, I think the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China being founded,
which is on October 1st.
Yeah, which is on October 1st. And then the launch of these discussions soon thereafter. So the timing, it was all about timing on the negotiations. It had nothing to do with, mom and pop supply chain guy who's, and again, we've heard a lot of this, like, it's just not going to help us out. October wasn't about helping out.
Right.
I mean, this administration not really focused on helping out importers. Let's be honest with ourselves. So,
the choice is that or more. If the choice is between a 2-week delay or, hey, I'm going to do another round of tariffs,
right?
That could happen at any point too. I think any movement towards an agreement is positive. And so while there's a lot of negative folks talking supply chains, we just have 2 more weeks, there is positive in that there have been a peace offering from China and then a peace offering from the U.S. as we head into these talks.
Yeah.
Going into the last round of talks, we were looking at tariffs. And so now I think looking at a goodwill gesture, that's a good thing. That's something. So
yeah,
it's better than where we've been, up until now.
Yeah. And I think that it also has something to do with what we're seeing on the polling side. And that has far more to do with what I think the White House is thinking about. This came out September 10th, this headline. I don't even know if you can read it. I'm just holding it up for dramatic effect more than anything. But 6 in 10 Americans expect a recession and higher prices as Trump's approval rating slips. This is from the Washington Post ABC News poll. Came out the 10th, and I'll just read a little bit of it for you. But President Trump is ending a tumultuous summer with his approval rating slipping back from a July high as Americans express widespread concern about the trade war with China, and a majority of voters now expect a recession within the year. So there's this view, at least from the polling side, in the minds of voters that 60% of voters think we're going to have a recession, and most tie that to the trade war. And the president, the morning of September 11th, this was Wednesday morning, said he was kind of pontificating on Twitter about the corrupt nature of the poll and that the poll had been wrong even during the 2016 campaign, and took some shots at it. But I have to imagine that the White House internally is concerned about these numbers because the president's ace in the hole has been the economy. The economy is doing gangbusters. There are many historic key performance indicators that the president can point to, things that any president, Republican or Democrat, numbers any president would die to have, in any administration. It's just some amazing numbers we're looking at. And if that starts to fade, if that starts to recede, if he starts to lose, that, I think there's a lot of nervousness on how the voter will react. And we are not even a year. We still have a year to go or more until the election. And so the narrative, if the economy retracts, prices go up, we see negative growth in the first few quarters of 2020, that narrative will set in. It will lock in. We saw it, I think we even saw it in 1991, as President Bush 41 had a strong economy that started to go south at the worst time possible, was locked in. That narrative was locked in, and President Clinton won an election. So I think that's the big concern. So as much as we look at what the Chinese have done and what the administration's done, I think they're looking for an out. Politico went as far this week to say, like, they're desperately seeking an out, that being the administration. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I do think their internal polling and the public polling we're seeing does not point to strong signs in the economy in the minds of the voters. And we all know how voters are. We all know how consumers are. We can be fickle people. And so even if all the indicators are strong in the economy, the moment we start feeling like something's coming ahead and slowing down in front of us, we start to draw back. We start to not spend as much. We start to kind of squirrel away those nuts for the winter, if you will. And that's a narrative they've got to push back against. And so added costs on consumer goods is like the worst thing you could do. We've been saying this ad nauseum, but again, it's the worst thing you can do. And I think the administration's really starting to kind of think through that.
And within that same Washington Post ABC poll, you had a question on it. Do you think that there are going to be higher prices for you and your family because of the trade war? 6 in 10 Americans said yes.
Right.
Either they're extremely concerned or somewhat concerned. I think the majority of those were extremely concerned. So you have that coupled with 6 in 10 Americans say they think we're headed to a recession, and it's very likely that the trade war and that recession will be tied together. Americans aren't going to buy that. Oh, well, it's the Fed's fault. With this, the Trump keeps going after the Fed on interest rates. So Americans are seeing this. It actually, we'll talk about the debate in a second too, but from last night, that played into the debate. You had some of the Democrat candidates who were citing this study. Castro was one. He brought this study up and said, 60% of Americans think we're headed to a recession on a question about trade. So they're getting tied together. That's the narrative now going into an election year. It's become a campaign issue. And so that's got to be concerning to the administration as we're heading into these trade talks, in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to Thomas's point, just reading this article, this is a quote: Trump's handling of trade negotiations with China is a particularly weak spot, with 35% of the new poll approving of him on this issue and 56 disapproving. So again, I think they are seeing those numbers and are starting to get spooked. And I've been asked pretty consistently by media, like, what, as an organization, what do we do to kind of ensure what do we do to kind of draw leverage on the administration? It's really hard to do. This is a dynamic, this administration, and this is why a lot of people voted for the president. He's not really tied to the normal levers that you pull on government. You can't go to a committee chairman of the same party and say, hey, we need help on this. Can you engage with the White House on it? We can't really go to the administration with kind of the normal, Republican talking points in hand on trade and think that we're going to have a sympathetic ear. And so my point is always, it had to be the consumer. It had to be the American public. And so the more we've been trying to educate the public, not just us, but the broader Tariffs for the Hard Land coalition that's run by a number of organizations, the more that we were doing that, that's, I think, where we're going to have the biggest impact. And my hope is that the last thing I want is a recession. I mean, people buy less shoes during a recession, but if we can sound the alarm and the administration is responsive, then we might enter into 2020 having dodged a massive bullet. But they've got to pull back these tariffs ASAP if they can.
Absolutely, and I think that's why the things that we've worked on, like the letter that was signed by more than 200 footwear companies. Before that, you had more than 170 companies saying, "We please do not do this," and cancel both the September 1st and December 15th tariffs immediately. We've got to do that. This is going to result in higher prices. That's why that's so important. It's something that we that is a message that had to get out there, and we've worked hard to get that message out there. And you are seeing that now. I think that's something, as that Washington Post ABC poll indicates, that narrative is really out there now. And to that, the other thing is, last night, the Democratic debates, you saw trade is such a huge issue now when you watched it, the first part was healthcare. They talked about race and national security and immigration, but I think the fourth big topic was trade. And George Stephanopoulos asked all the candidates, would you end the tariffs on day one? How would you handle the China tariffs? Would you end the tariffs? And it was really interesting watching that because, one, it was the same theme throughout. Everyone said they all acknowledged the problem with China. Just about everybody acknowledged there were issues, whether it's human rights or IP or jobs, other issues. Everybody touched on that. And they also touched on the lack of a strategy. That was the default answer that almost every candidate said last night. The president strategy, he's doing trade policy by tweet. It is erratic, haphazard, arbitrary. Those were some of the words that were thrown around. So everybody kind of defaulted on that. And then they said, no one really answered the question. Yang said that he would no to the answer. But if you look at what they said, most were, I would go back to the negotiating table. I would have a strategy. Mayor Pete said, I would have a strategy, including the tariffs as leverage. Klobuchar said, I would not have put the tariffs in to begin with, but I would go back to the negotiating table. Castro said, I would immediately begin to ratchet down the trade war. So you had things like that, but nobody said, I'm going to take off the tariffs on day one. That was the question. Nobody really answered it. It was all, there's no strategy. There's a lot. The other thing is there's a lot of harm that's happening. That was another theme. Everyone talked about the harm to farmers and U.S. consumers and U.S. businesses, but there wasn't really an answer to the question on would they take away the tariffs. So I think, that's something we've been saying too, is that, there is concern as this drags on out into the election year, becomes an election issue, it gets tied into that. How do the candidates get out of that? So we saw that last night too.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting about Thomas's summary there, it holds to the fact that what we've been thinking about, the president's taken a Democratic issue. There's always, and kind of preempted the Democrats on it and boxed them in to how they respond. There's always been bipartisan support for challenging China in some way, but because of the traditional labor union Democrat support that's been the base of the Democratic Party for a long, long time now, the Democrats have treaded more lightly on trade liberalization than Republicans, going back all the way to Senator Obama in Ohio, debating whether or not he would leave NAFTA at the time. This was back in 2008. But as we've seen, with just in a bipartisan way, once these candidates become president, they see that diplomacy relies on trade, engagement relies on trade, and that at the end of the day, lip service to one group or another on the protection side is not a way to govern a nation of 330 million people. President Trump has taken that, flipped on its head, and really done what he said he's going to do. And as much as we don't approve of the strategy, now we're in a position where these candidates cannot, in their right mind, in a primary, come out and say, no, we've been too hard on China. Let's take down the costs. They all seem to be, it seems more, Thomas, about style over substance. Like, we won't be as mean, or we'll have a strategy, or we'll keep talking at the table, knowing that talks have been going on behind the scenes for quite some time. So to me, it's what's the most concerning. There's not one candidate out there that is kind of waving the flag of trade liberalization that has been waved by Democrats and Republicans for generations. And it's more of the, I think it's more, it's not the cause, it's more of a symptom of this nationalism that we're seeing, that this concern over sovereignty, this concern over trade agreements as a whole, of giving away sovereignty. And what I argue pretty consistently is that now this isn't even about a free trade agreement with China. We're not talking about an agreement that's going to be a progressive agreement in the sense that we're going to be eliminating duties that were in place for many years in a permanent way. This is a triage. This is you've tied a tourniquet to my arm that's bleeding, that you've caused the bleed, and now we're just figuring out how to stop the bleeding. And so to me, it's just this whole talk about we're going to have a beautiful deal, it's going to be a negotiated deal. Is it going to be a free trade agreement? No. You got to send that to Congress. That won't pass. What is it going to be? It's going to be just some enforcement on IP stuff. that doesn't really translate into kind of a permanent trade agreement. So again, that goes back to the strategy. What is the strategy and what do we want? And I think it's hard to kind of pick that out from all the things that have been said to us by the administration on the trade side.
Yeah. So, and I mean, that's really, I mean, those are some great points. And I think you didn't see any comments about from former Vice President Biden of walking back on China, being a paper tiger or anything like that. You saw people, pointing out the different issues within China, the different problems, and so no one wants to be perceived as being weak on China. That really played out last night, and so again, there's no answer to how and no clear policy of other than we'll go to the negotiating table and work out a deal. There was no principles laid out last night. So that's really where we are with the debates and with trade negotiations with the U.S. and China.
I suspect we'll start to see. I think we'll continue to see these kind of small token kind of things that both sides start to put out there as a sign of goodwill heading to the negotiations. And I do know they're talking even now at the operational level, maybe not at the secretary and the cabinet level with Ambassador Lighthizer, but I do know at the operational level there are talks going on, and I think they're working towards some kind of agreement, and it just depends on how the president digests that, feels about it, and how they think an agreement will play publicly with the consumer base that is clearly getting more and more spooked by the way in which the administration's handling these negotiations. So.
And one thing we do is the second there's any update, we send out an email. We hold our weekly calls every Friday at 1. And so, if you're an FDR member and you're not on those calls, please join us. If you're not getting the emails for some reason, let us know so we can make sure that you're getting the emails and you're on the list, so that the second there's an agreement or some change or, heaven forbid, more tariffs, we will let you know the second it happens. So please let us know if for some reason you're not getting the emails, or if you'd like to join the calls on Friday. We'd love to have you join the calls and have some really good weekly discussion on what's going on tariffs.
All right. So what we're going to do, we got questions. We have questions. We have an opportunity for you to ask questions in the chat box if you want. We'll be hanging out here kind of talking, but please kind of upload your questions and we will handle them as best as we know how. And we are not Nostradamus. I don't know if he was that accurate. I don't think he was, but we will do our best to try to answer questions as we kind of feel it out. This has been a lesson in navigating uncertainty, and I have to say, as I filibuster waiting for questions to come in, I have to say that our all kidding aside, our industry has been an amazing example of the ways in which you can navigate uncertainty. You can engage in public debate in the public sector with the letters, with the 13 executives testifying in DC against this, with the media appearances and the op-eds and the engagement with media. I think of Columbia Sportswear and Wolverine Worldwide and Nike, and I think of Deer Stags, family owned, Jay Renee out of the Dallas area. These family owned companies, large and small, Target, Walmart, you name it. These big companies, these little companies, all engaging in this issue in a public way. And so it's no matter what the outcome is, it's been an honor to really be a part of that process and see these companies really working on behalf of the consumers. So, what questions do you have? Put them in the chat box, and we will answer them as soon as they start flowing in. So, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. I think as we move closer to that October date, I think we'll have a pretty good idea, probably based on leaks and more of these overtures about where the talks are heading. You're even seeing kind of notes on right now the U.S. is negotiating a mini free trade agreement with Japan. You're seeing some of what they're trying to accomplish ahead of the president meeting with Prime Minister Abe in New York. I think next week you're seeing some of that leak out about what's in the agreement. So I think as we get closer to these talks, you might hear and see more things that are out there as it relates to what they're trying to figure out, what they're going to do.
Also, in October, if October 27th through the 29th, Long Beach, California, you want to be there. This is the Shoe Tariff Conference, FTDC. It's our 55th year doing the event, but this year everything's going to be tied into shoe tariffs. And so if you want to know about best practices, how to deal with the tariffs, this is something that you don't want to miss. It's a great event. We've got it. Go to our website, fdra.org/FTDC, and you can see the full agenda, the full lineup. You can learn more about the event, but it's really filled up this year. There is maybe a limited number of spots for that. At least there's definitely a limited number of hotel block spots. And so you want to go ahead, if you can, and go ahead and reserve today. You can do that. Go to fdra.org/FTDC and click on that link, and you can get your spot today. But that's something that we've got a lot of people coming out for that event, and I hope you'll join us in Long Beach.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest. We've kind of rebranded it the tariff event. So we're going to be talking about tariffs at every aspect, how these tariffs are impacting logistics and trade and customs. We have a question from our friend Daniel Sepulveda out of Mexico, our good friends to the south. Do you have the % of duty tax that applies per upper material? We know that it is 15% for leather upper shoes, but what about synthetic and textile? So that's a good question, Daniel. Basically, the two lists are split up based on, there's a list 4A and 4B. 4A went into effect September 1st. 4B is scheduled to go into effect December 15th. The criteria they used was anything that was 75% or more at the 8-digit HTS level was postponed till December 15th. But if product that was coming in at the 8-digit HTS level was less than 75% import penetration from China, that got hit September 1st. Almost all leather footwear was hit.
I think there were 3 lines. Golf shoes was one of them, but and very low value women's shoes under $250 a pair were also postponed to December. But otherwise, if you make leather upper shoes, you're probably on the September list.
Yeah. Just from China.
Just from
not Mexican leather shoes.
Just from China. But yeah, that's one of the categories that really got hit hard was leather upper shoes. And on that 75% threshold, it's still not clear how the United States Trade Representative's office arrived at that threshold. It does work to put certain products like toys and electronics and others that are almost 100% in China. Those get passed on and delayed to December, so it has that effect. When it comes to shoes, when you're going tariff line by tariff line, it varies so much on the import penetration or the what country, whether it's 60% China or 80% China. And so that's kind of, it really was hit or miss with footwear. We've got the majority is on the September 1st list and has already been hit with these 15% tariffs. There's other tariff lines that are delayed to December. If you want more, email us. We're happy to send you more information on, the specific lists.
Yeah. I mean, to go back to Daniel's question, it's not based on synthetic versus textile versus leather. Really, it's not. It's based on how much of it actually comes from China versus doesn't. And so in general, you might think to yourself, well, cheap synthetic shoes are probably actually more likely to be delayed until December 15th. These are generalizations. Where if you think about leather, we have a lot of sources of leather footwear around the world, not just the big 3, not just China, Vietnam, Indonesia, but Mexico, of course. Ethiopia sends us leather footwear. Italy sends us leather footwear. Colombia, Nicaragua. So there's more diversification in the supply chain. The irony is that there's a recognition from the administration that if we delay to December 15th, we might give these products that are more reliant on China time to diversify because we want people out of China. But conversely, we're going to hit those products that are more diversified and aren't trying to move out of China. We're going to hit them first up September 1st. So it's the reasoning is, depending on who you talk to, is kind of squirrely one way or the other. But it's a good question, Daniel. Thank you for that.
Great question. Thank you.
And we'll be happy to provide you, if you have specific HTS lines you want us to let you know. And it's 15% on top of the duty rate paid. So that gives you an idea. You add that on top of whatever the duty rate is.
Right.
What other questions do folks have that they want to dump in the live chat box, and we'll be happy to answer them, or comments? We'll read.
And we'll read out your comment if you want to post comment on
other people
anything
can read them too. I think so. We're not the
so be
most
careful.
tech
Yeah,
savvy.
exactly. We'll see. Another thing we're doing while we're waiting on the next question is we have on our website, we have a link that links to the latest news on the tariffs. So if you want to check that out, you can see kind of we keep that updated with our quotes and important information. So there's a red bar on our FDRA.org website. You just click on that and go to the 15% shoe tariffs, and you can see more about what all is going on there.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that makes me nervous about all this is that next year is the 90th anniversary of Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which was the start of the tariff regime that we still are living with, that collects $3 billion in duties. And if it tells you anything, so we're going to collect about the U.S. government's going to collect about $3 billion in duties on footwear this year. If we continue on with both these lists in effect, 4A and 4B, that number in 2020 will be $5.2 billion. It shows you how dramatically increased these costs are going to go up. And if you do just a 3-time multiplier effect for retail and footwear, I saw Tony is on as well. I mean, I think that's going to be close to a $14 or $15 billion in added costs for the consumer just to cover the tariff, having nothing to do with the quality of the product, having nothing to do with the channel or the service, having someone sit and fit your shoes, having nothing to do with anything constructive or value added to the product or the buying experience itself. It will just go to cover the tariffs. And I'm nervous when we are coming up on the 90th anniversary of revenue that flows into the government that's in serious debt. Mm-hmm. Are they going to be willing to give up that revenue moving forward? We saw the Democratic candidates last night for president didn't seem too keen on giving it up right away. And I can imagine that, once you add tariffs to stuff, it's really hard to dial those tariffs back. And I suspect the Chinese are pretty adamant that any short-term agreement, which the president has been referencing at the last 48 hours, any temporary agreement would have to see some kind of elimination or drawback from these duties. But that remains to be seen.
No, that's a great point. And if you look at footwear is really one of the unique areas in the tariff code where you're dealing with duties that go up to 67% on some shoes. So you're adding a 15% tariff on top of that. We've had a threatened 25% tariff on top of that. It's currently 15%. That really has an impact. And as Matt said, those have been in place since the 30s, this presumption of high tariffs for footwear. And so once you have that tariff in place, it's really, really hard to take it off. And it'll be interesting to see with all of the tariffs that have come in on, China and steel and aluminum, how the next president deals with that. Whether it's the next election cycle or after, how do they deal with having this revenue stream coming in? And so that's something to really watch. It's only going to become a bigger issue going into the election, and so we'll be watching that very, very closely.
Yeah, because I think consumers get socialized to not to use the S word in this campaign, but it gets socialized as to what people want to spend. It gets baked in the product, and it's not a line item on a receipt, so people they don't have access to it. They don't have line of sight to that added cost. And I think once it's in place, it's hard to pull that back. What other questions? We'll give it another few minutes as we wrap up, knowing that's a Friday afternoon, and we want people to go home and enjoy their families and not think about tariffs for several days. Do you have any other closing questions or thoughts for us as we draw this live stream to a close? Just put it in the chat box. And Thomas, kind of as we wrap up, what are some things to think about moving ahead? Is there anything we didn't cover, or that we're not thinking critically about these things?
I think we've got a lot of resources that we're trying to really push out to members. We mentioned the calls, we mentioned FTDC. We're also doing a design summit that's going to have a tariff feature there, where we're going to talk about how tariffs impact shoe design, and that's going to be in New York in November. Mm-hmm. So that's another event. If you're watching now and you do footwear design, that's something you may want to attend. So we're really trying to tie this into all our events this year. And and keeping members up to speed on what's going on. So that's that's something we're really trying hard for. And I think we've got another
David
question
Bach
here.
David, hope you're doing well, man. Thanks for joining. We assume that the effective date for the September 1st list is based on the importation date of September 1 or later. Is this correct? That is correct. There was some confusion because the president tweeted out on August 1st that he was moving ahead on these, and then we had to wait quite a while before the list came out. And then once the list came out, Customs then had to put out its proclamation. I mean, it was like a couple of days before. And only once that we know of had they allowed for export date, which was list 3 going from 10 to 25%. Start of the summer, May, June timeframe. But yeah, this is an importation date effective in September 1. It had to be basically cleared by September 1.
And we got a lot of questions on that leading up to that because September 1 was a Sunday and then there was a Labor Day holiday. So we had people, that had asked, well, how does that play into it? And it really didn't. It hit at midnight on September 1st is when the tariffs took effect.
Yeah, good question. I'm glad you asked that, David. Hope you're doing well. Any other questions from our audience? Please just type them in the live chat box and we will answer them on the fly to the best of our ability as Thomas drinks his tea while we do Kicks Over Coffee. So we could have just said it's
I could have said it's black. It's just regular black coffee, right?
Yeah, good thing Chinese don't produce coffee because it'd be tariffed by now. So, all right. Well, with that, we've been doing this for about 38 minutes and we were delayed getting started because we had technical difficulties as usual. But thank you for joining. I don't know how often we'll do this. We'll give it a shot. We're trying to kind of connect with people in a lot of different areas, whether it's this, our podcast, Shoe and Show, shoeandshow.com is another area where we do a lot talking about these kinds of things and much broader than this actually. So check that out. And then if you're an FDRA member, we're clearly kind of engaging at just about every step of the way. So we literally kind of pre-write notices as if they're, this is a stupid anecdote I always talk about, but the major newspapers, they write celebrity obituaries before they actually die. So then when they die, they can get it out. They can be the first one to get it out. And so a lot of times we'll pre-write notices, not knowing what's going to actually happen. But once we do know, we can push it out.
Which is hard to do because there's so many different ways this could go. There's so many different scenarios that could play out.
It's like a choose your own announcement, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
So anyway, but thank you for being on with us, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and keep you informed. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you next time around.
Thanks, everyone.